And lo and behold, dear friends, the winter 2022 anime season has come and gone. Unfortunately, in my region of the world, the snow hasn't quite gone away yet. I'm actually recording this as snow falls down outside. Christ, I hate winter. So, as I usually do, I'll be compiling all the shows from the season that won't get full reviews here in this video. Just like before, if something isn't included here, it's because I either didn't see it, a review of it is already in the works, or it's not finished yet at the time of recording. Therefore, shows like Requiem of the Rose King and Q will not be featured because they're only halfway through their runs. I didn't watch others like Slow Loop. I've already made videos for Akabi Sailor Uniform and Platinum End, and I intend to make a video for Tokyo 24th Ward. The shows will be arranged in alphabetical order by English title, if applicable, and I'll also put timestamps in the video description if you want to skip to a show you had in mind. With all that said, roll that stock music and let's begin. 86 Part 2 continues the franchise's streak of pessimism and futility in war, while also contributing significantly to expanding the world. Many of the characters from the first season display a change in their personalities or thinking that feels natural, and the conflict's continued expansion, even historically speaking, was strong. I cannot quite determine whether I liked or disliked it more than Season 1, but there were still a slew of moments that were positively thrilling, and, at one moment in a post-credits sequence, genuinely scary. The CGI animation was even smoother this time around, keeping battles fluid and tight. It also seemed to do a better job of sound mixing. One or two stagnant episodes stop it from getting a perfect score, and while I would have definitely liked to see more of Milize, I sincerely hope we get a little more 86 in the future, but preferably without the production delays. I give 86 Part 2 a 9 out of 10. Attack on Titan: The Final Season Part 2 does a solid job of bringing the final conflict of the series into focus, and Mappa depicted the rumbling and other grandiose events well. Everything feels appropriately apocalyptic, and the various factions and ideologies clash in fascinating, if not also rather tiring, ways. I'm also not terribly fond of a couple of directions the story took, such as reintroducing a character who hasn't been seen in years and trying to emphasize their narrative importance and backstory. That said though, it was still a good season. As the franchise moves into its last hours, we'll just have to see what happens now. I give Attack on Titan: The Final Season Part 2 a 7 out of 10. The Genius Prince's Guide to Raising a Nation Out of Debt takes a dull concept and largely saves it with a fun group of main characters and players. The financial straits of the kingdom allow both dramatic and comedic moments to play out to mixed success, but seeing Wayne and Ninim deal with the endless barrage of inconveniences, bad luck, politicking, and wartime decisions was entertaining. Even if the soundtrack is nothing special, the plot is a little rushed, and the animation is a little bit overly bland and unengaging, I had more fun with these characters than I thought I would. I don't know if I'd want to see more of this series, but I'll consider it. I give The Genius Prince's Guide to Raising a Nation Out of Debt a 6 out of 10. How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom Season 2 is nowhere near as funny or engaging as the first season that preceded it. While it is nice to see the geopolitical fallout from the last season take shape, a lot of it feels oddly inconsequential, and the expanded roster of characters is, unfortunately, not quite capable of carrying out the story. There are some individual moments that land effectively, like the trial, but others like the Good Slave Master, the Native American stand-ins, the Marital Bliss class, and not really knowing the concept of hygiene just read as badly integrated or conceived. Needless to say, I will not be seeing more of this series if there are any other seasons to come. I give How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom Season 2 a 3 out of 10. In the Land of Leadale has some pretty mediocre animation in the beginning, not to mention the strange fact that the hospital somehow ran out of power and had no generator. In total, it's a relatively uninteresting isekai universe that is spiced up with some character dynamics that are, at times, adorable or funny. The overarching mysteries are acceptable, and the power fantasy aspect is rather run-of-the-mill, but the marriage between the two isn't handled especially well. It's not quite good enough, but it's not terrible. It truly does fall right smack dab in the middle, even if it was one of the earliest VR MMORPG isekai. I give In the Land of Leadale a 5 out of 10. Love of Kill is an unexciting take on bounty hunting agents and assassins. The action scenes themselves are not engaging, mostly because the relationship between the two main characters, supposedly the center of the entire drama, just didn't click for me at the dramatic or comedic level. The color palette employed throughout the series is bright, too bright, honestly. As far as watching the plot unfold, I cannot help but feel like there's a lot of aspects to the main protagonists and story events left missing. I haven't read the manga, so I cannot clarify whether or not that's the truth, but it seems to be the implication I was getting as I was watching it. Somebody can clarify whether or not that is actually the case or not. You can also only pull the fake out so many times before it loses its luster. It was ultimately unmemorable, which is a shame given the concept. I give Love of Kill a 4 out of 10. Lupin III Part 6 is an inconsistent series, swinging like a pendulum between fun stories and slogs. The Sherlock Holmes mystery in the first half came across as being better as a film than in the television format, as the pacing was at times a bit disjointed. The second half mystery was far more intriguing both conceptually and delivery-wise. The action sequences were always nice, especially with the car chases, and seeing Lupin and Fujiko's dynamic afforded some decent comedy. For being my first foray into Lupin III, I do indeed want to see more, but if you're considering this as an entry point, perhaps a different installment will work better. I give Lupin III Part 6 a completely unintentional 6 out of 10. My dress-up darling uses the main cast's enthusiasm for aesthetics, ecchi, and beauty to success. Having so many characters get engrossed in the cosplaying was both funny and sweet, and being able to see all the creations come to life, as well as learn some things about the hobby, was also quite welcome. It uses its weirdness to endear rather than judge, and the affect worked. There were a handful of moments where the ecchi comedy did go just a little too overboard, but it could have flopped a lot harder than it might have otherwise. Gojo and Kitagawa were a blast to see bounce off of one another, both romantically and comedically, which made this series one of my highlights during the winter. I give My Dress-Up Darling an 8 out of 10. Orient tries very hard to make its best impression, with the animation giving its all despite never quite crossing the Sakuga threshold, and the overarching conflict dragging it down. The main trio of characters are unfortunately nothing beyond stock for a shonen, and the treatment of Tsugumi when she finally becomes a proper member of the band never pans out to anything worthwhile. This was a series definitely hurt by the 12-episode structure, as it moved so quickly in certain moments that exposition was sloppily handled and tension could barely build itself appropriately. I imagine that the manga is better, and there is a second season of the show coming, but I'm not intrigued by the story enough to commit to that. It felt mediocre from the start, and sadly didn't ramp up enough. I give Orient a 3 out of 10. Police in a Pod tries to balance its cynicism of being a police box officer with the amazingness of what the job entails, but the comedy is not sharp enough to make the balancing act work. While it is a nice-looking show aesthetically, it also stumbles in regards to its two main characters, as Kawaii especially got on my nerves rather quickly. Watching this show, and given that the original mangaka was a police officer herself, I couldn't help but feel like it's constantly holding back its real cynical nature. It's almost like there is an entire trove of stories that could be told, but for reasons of self-censorship or loyalty, they aren't. As a result, it's constantly defaulting to glamorizing the profession in the end, which didn't translate to entertaining for me. I give Police in a Pod a 4 out of 10. Ranking of Kings is bursting with warmth and creative love in both its cartoonishly sweet aesthetic and its many characters. Boji's quest to become a stronger, great king is at once both adorable and endearing, and Kage affords some much-appreciated foil and comedy for the journey, complete with some lush animation in the fight sequences and a narrative that continuously offers surprises and developments for its characters. This series, along with Vivi Fluorite Eye's song, demonstrates that Studio Wit in their post-Attack on Titan world have plenty of talent and daring to utilize. While it does drag sometimes and takes a rather long time for the series to get its endgame in focus since we're left rather in the dark, it has been a delightful ride. I give Ranking of Kings an 8 out of 10. Rust Eater Bisco most definitely feels like a rushed light novel adaptation, despite the generally decent animation and battle sequences. It takes almost no time at all for Bisco and Nekoyanagi to become best buddies once they hit the road. Pawu's character never quite came into focus beyond being a tool for Nekoyanagi's character, and the sequence of events that leads from the beginning to the end moves too quickly. The series managed to do its best in the first and middle thirds as the world building and the mythology of the Mushroom Keepers expanded, and does alright at bringing back older elements toward the end. It's probably the series from this season that I most wanted to like, but can't bring myself to make that leap. I give Rust Eater Bisco a 6 out of 10. Sasaki and Miyano is a good romance that has a slow burn and the occasional comedic moment. The two main characters gradually getting closer together had its awkwardness and self-doubt that felt pretty natural and easy to track. Studio Dean's attention to visual detail in general is cute, which came across as appropriate given the show's context, though certain aspects of the series, like the cross-dressing and Sasaki's possessive tendency, could have been handled perhaps a little more gracefully, and an occasional period that does feel a touch too slow. This was a fun little surprise. I haven't seen that much boys love material, but what was here was enjoyable. I give Sasaki and Miyano a 7 out of 10. Teasing Master Takagi-san Season 3 is the best season of the franchise yet, as the numerous vignettes manage to land some good, adorable moments. While Nishikata is still somewhat oblivious to Takagi's feelings to the point where it's starting to wear thin, the season overall paints a more complete romantic tableau for the two characters that feels earnest and sweet. Even the digressions with the other characters felt more solid this time around, but the Christmas, White Day, and New Year's stories were easily the big standouts. I will definitely be seeing the film when it comes out. I give Teasing Master Takagi-san Season 3 an 8 out of 10. World's End Harem is an oddity. The in-universe explanation for why there are no men left anywhere in the world actually works in its own bizarre sense, and the way the women try to politic and utilize the few remaining men is somewhat intriguing. That said, it feels confused about how dramatic it wants to be. When it's being silly, it's occasionally fun. When it's being serious, it doesn't work as often, not helped by bad pacing. The main character is chivalrous to the point of absurdity, as his decision not to copulate would likely result in the extinction of humanity. You can, in fact, work during the day and boink in the evening, but holding out on finding your love in an apocalyptic future matters more, I suppose. I would also like to submit its final episode as a dishonorable mention for worst animation of the year thus far. It easily had the ugliest and most pallid character models and errors. If you're going to animate a shirt with a stain on it, and the shirt moves, move the stain as well. Especially given that the series was already delayed 3 months, there is no excuse for this. I give World's End Harem a 3 out of 10. And those are my thoughts on everything else that I watched from winter 2022. I know that there were some that I missed, so perhaps I'll see those at a later date. In the meantime, what were some of your thoughts on the winter 2022 anime season? Leave your thoughts below in the comments. In the meantime, this has been ZNoteTaku. Happy viewing, everyone.